became outlived. More literary theory. It was the first time the literary theory was seriously integrated into the field, and other approaches were used. Up to then, it was not uncommon that if you wrote a thesis and you allowed yourself to interpret the text, then some older professor would just write a review and destroy you, because you're supposed to do philology. That's it. And other things were just not accepted. Thank God we overcame this period, and by now we have recognized that literary theory is the way often to come at the core of a text, or come closer to the core of the text better than any other. So this is, I show you here, a series called LitCon, Literatur in Context. That was the first series in Germany. You see the letters, the volumes are numbered by Arabic letters, Alif, Bade. These were the first volumes, and it has now gone the second time through the Arabic alphabet. It is full of good studies, mainly by younger people, using literary theory of all kinds. So the Kulturwissenschaften then went through a period of self-criticism on the one hand, and they also opened up to using social studies to develop a greater interest in non-elite culture, not just reading classical Arabic texts, but things like popular epics or literature that's not literature, private diaries, anything that moved. And Arabists started to have as a rule a second discipline. And well, you are lucky because you come in having another discipline already. And so, but if you only do Arabic studies, you do need another discipline, because most likely you need either literary theory or architecture, whatever the subject of your research is, because Arabic studies itself has no methodology other than text analysis. So I give you just an example here: theater studies, philosophy, media studies, social anthropology, social geography, and the list is not a closed list. And here is a book that I would like to, that has most recently made a little splash in Germany. It's redefining Arabic studies in a very new way. The English translation, it's a brand new book. The English translation is still in the making. There will be one. I would nonetheless strongly encourage you to use at least the bibliographies given in there. The book is useful in terms of reframing modern Arabic studies. It doesn't have anything on pre-modern. That's not in there. But if you know modern Arabic studies, and at least half of you will do a modern subject, I suppose. Or am I wrong? Probably. If you do pre-modern, there's tons of stuff. But for introduction or handbooks on modern Arabic studies, this is the latest and best. On the one hand, it has a chapter on objects, namely theater or art, a second chapter on cultural practices, and then a third one on concepts such as gender, memory, trauma, space, emotion, language thinking, body, and so on. One of the authors happens to be postdoc at this university, Yvonne Albers. And so even if you don't read the text, you can put it through Google Translate. But they are very important methodological study for whatever concept or subject or object you want to get involved with. So furthermore, the philology itself has come like a phoenix from the ashes in terms of world philology. So after having suffered a kind of critique as othering whatever is outside of Europe, now philologies have all been, come up to the same level. And that is called world philology, which means that any linguistic culture, whether it's Austronesian or Slavic or Icelandic or Hebrew, these are all philologies, and each of those cultures tend to have its own cultural technique. So in each one, there will be different concepts, there'll be different texts, the different types of scholars and institutions. And to see these in comparison with each other and see, where are there similar things? And by the way, you don't have to go through Europe. You can do, an oblique comparison. You can compare Sanskrit with Akkadian or Arabic with Chinese. They will very often have more in common because, let's say, Arabic literature tends to be written by people, or is often written by people whose second or third language it is. So it's a language of written communication. It is not a mother tongue. You're not born speaking Fusha, even if you're an Arab. And on the other hand, China is a country with many, many different languages. And one variety has become the written language. But people speak three others. If you go to India, it's even worse. So multilinguality, multiple registers, difference between spoken and written language, these are phenomena that in Germany we don't know at all. We write and speak pretty much the same thing. And the language lasts, well, there's a little bit of Switzerland and Austria, but that's about it. If you speak Spanish or Chinese or Arabic, you have somewhere between 10, 20 countries that speak the same language. And on the other hand, the language has been around for centuries. So there tends to be a long memory in people using language. So, you go to any bus driver, he'll quote Mutanabbi to you, and that's from the 10th century. So this long memory in people and users of the language is also a more wider spread in languages with a long literary tradition that are spoken by many people of different mother languages. So much for world philology. And there are actually two things that happen right at this university, so I would encourage you to look them up. The journal Philological Encounters, edited by Islam Daye, and this was a co-invention when Sheldon Pollock, Sanskritist in the United States, Columbia University, came up with the idea of a cosmopolis, so of a linguistic culture that is only defined by its language. He created that concept for Sanskrit. Then Islam Daye over here founded the same, had an idea about the same concept, and then the two met, and he founded the journal. For Southeast Asia, Ronit Ricci has used the same term, cosmopolis, the Islamic cosmopolis of Southeast Asia, where a completely different understanding of Islamic literature comes out in different other languages, Malay, and reusing of Arabic language as well. Often texts have then two scripts, line by line. And there's also a new comprehensive historical lexicon in the making with 20 different linguistic philologies side by side that I have the honor to be involved in. This is one of those books. This is again by Sheldon Pollock and others, where you see nicely side by side all these different languages, and none is better than the other, but rather they're looked at on an even level. And this is just a cover to show you how it looks. The journal is in our library, both on paper and print for those who like to have something in their fingers, but also online. And if you look at the table of contents, it really goes across the world. And this is the beauty of this journal. So the result is that now in Kulturwissenschaften we have a greater openness to non-canonical texts, to marginalized literature, popular culture, popular science. And what is still in need of further investigation is the pre-modern reception and its artifacts. It's just starting now, people looking, for instance, at manuscript notes. here is a likewise new interest in texts that don't behave well, meaning texts that don't remain stable. I've told you before about editing, and when a text, is kept together, and we'll talk about that a bit later, over the centuries, and sure, there's small changes, but if you edit, let's say, Aristotle in Arabic translation over the centuries, or some religious texts, or a fiqh collection, whatever, any particularly a poetic diwan or a book on poetics, you take a couple of manuscripts and you can actually do what Lachmann would have done, meaning out of a couple of manuscripts, you establish the best possible text. However, sometimes this is not possible because a text has changed too much. That happens too. What an accident. For a while, such texts tended to be a little bit put on the sidelines for lack of ability to deal with them. And one of them you may right away guess is, of course, well, unless your parents read it to you when you were children, but the Arabian Nights, the 1001 Nights, it's one of those open collections. That's sort of on the extreme end of a text that moves. But there are others, and we'll talk about that later. But most recently, also again, across all the fields, there is an interest in variance. So we no longer get weirded out by texts that change, but rather we find that rather interesting. And the more you think about the mobility, the fluidity of textual tradition, of things that we would like to kid ourselves remain stable, one discovers that living texts are, I don't want to say the norm, but are really way more present than we have had the impression in the days when we worked with printed books. And I think that our way of living now, reading a lot of text on the internet, and internet texts are fluid, and there's versioning. You can change it very quickly, you can update it, you can write your own blogs. So for the 300 years when books had to go through print, there was an institutional and a financial control by a verleger who would accept your manuscript and print it. And that was that. So the threshold for any text to be able to be circulated was higher. And that threshold has significantly lowered. And by now, with the foundation of Berlin University Press, was this opened up, we have our own university publishing house now, where any member of this university may publish a book without cost, immediate open access, diamond standard. And this requirement has become more and more common in our age. So for me, this is all new, but you are lucky enough to live in a time where the threshold to publishing and also publishing scholarship has become very low. So if you have something smart to say, there are few people who can prevent you from doing so. So in the last decade, I already mentioned digitization, but the interesting part is that the digitization, which is a very modern technology, on the other extreme, makes an ancient technology, namely writing with your hand, having your autograph available through digitization. And after manuscript studies were for almost 100 years not really very fashionable, and few people did it, it was incredibly cumbersome. You had to, travel far, sit and wait, write out forms, come with many stamps and get visas. Now you go on the internet and you can leaf through something. It's not the same, but it comes close. So the combination of available digital technology and available manuscripts has made a new approach of digital codicology, and that has opened many, many more avenues of research. Finally, this is just a summary of what I already told you. You can just read it if you want. I don't need to repeat it. This is not all, however, because we deal with a language that we tend to use as our field of study, and tend to forget that we have colleagues across the Mediterranean in the East and South who write their scholarship in that language. And we should, at this day and age, practice more producing and disseminating scholarship in the language of the scholarship, so that the gulf between European practitioners of Arabic studies and those more numerous ones in the Middle East, who I would argue have often a much deeper and broader understanding of the sources, is actually quite enlightening. And there is an article by Christian Junge, professor in Marburg University, touching language, where he is making this case. It's also uploaded on Blackboard. And I admit it's a little bit hard work, but even at this university, we have been able in the past to offer courses in scholarly writing in Arabic, and we hope to be able to continue that. This is now when now and then it happens to me too, and I have to admit I was rather nervous, but I got it done. And, going back to history, we have to think about what Arabic literature is coming out of. There are several ingredients. One is, of course, early Arabic literature that was transmitted, that was composed and transmitted orally. And it goes back, you may be slightly surprised, but it goes back as early as the 6th century, our time. Nonetheless, this was mere oral, so the poems, pre-Islamic poetry, Jahiliyyah, Mu'allaqat, kind of texts that we have now in written form, but 200 years later. So for 200 years, those texts were transported somehow. How was that done? That's the first ingredient of not forgetting, and that is a professionalization of the person who transmitted such poetry.
Professor.
I keep forgetting. No, it's okay. That as a poet, you had a person who would accompany you. Sometimes it was a sort of apprentice who would memorize your entire corpus. It was the Rawi. And this Rawi then would carry on the repertoire and pass it on to the next person, and so on and so forth. And through these Rawis, those corpora of famous poets, not every poet, were preserved and passed on. So we are going through, we've sort of covered the first 200 years, where I explained to you through the oral technique of the Ruwat, the texts were transmitted. I was just about to say these texts were stable. You can sit there.
You need
anyway, I have to stay there. And but they were not stable like a printed text. An oral tradition, while it is being kept in shape, because first of all, texts are already built in a form that helps to keep them. They have a mnemonic technology. They have rhyme and meter, and that helps to retain in your memory a text more easily, because the structure of the wazn, which is very strict in Arabic, and also the qafiyah, the rhyme letter, helps you to keep things in place. It's about like a spine with vertebrae. And that helped. Nonetheless, Rawi would always use a little bit of flexibility to change a place name, to change a person addressed, to change smaller things within each line, or changing some lines around, adding some lines, cutting some lines. So although a poem remains recognizable and the authorship tends to be known, even if we have 6th century, people know it's Tarafa ibn al-Abd, or it's Shanfara, it's we have the names of those people. even the female poets as well, Khansa, very famous, or Layla al-Akhyalia. And, or even, you know, oh, it's a Bedouin girl from the tribe of Tamim. And Bedouin girls were very good with describing clouds for some reason. And that kept the tradition together for a certain while, but all human memory has a limitation. This is why very early on in Arabic literature, and poets already said that. I mean, Zurrumma, the famous Umayyad poet, secretly had his Rawi write down his poetry in a notebook because he wouldn't trust him, and he didn't want the Rawi to change his text. He wanted his poetry to perdure as it was. So he mistrusted that flexibility of the transmitters. And Zurrumma and Umayyad, desert poet. So from the 8th and 9th century onwards, bookmaking was practiced in the Middle East, and first on papyrus and on parchment. These were the writing materials familiar to the people in the region. Papyrus goes back to the ancient Egyptians, and you just need to have papyrus plants. And parchment was a even older technique. But and the first books here, we have the Life of the Prophet by the transmitter Wahb ibn Munabbih, were indeed on papyrus. But what you notice when you look at the text, well, I can't walk. You have to look from here. You will notice that the script is still missing certain things that later on are familiar to you in Arabic script. Anybody notice what's missing? No dots. Yep. And never mind vowels. The Arabic, there's some, yeah. Dot. Thank you. So dots are something that could be used ad libitum at the time, and also when the language was written down first, the alphabet adapted was a late Aramaic alphabet, which had fewer consonants. For instance, ha and kha had fallen together, and a couple of other sounds. Therefore, 20 signs were there to write 28 sounds. So almost every third sound had no letter. So the diacritics repaired that. So you use the letter a couple of times with different dots, there you go. So it's a very smart system if you put the dots. And that system of dots is indeed very old. The first requisitioning of sheep in the year 22 of Hijra already is nicely dotted. That was a contract. So people wanted no sheep to get lost, or rather the army went and they stole 22 sheep from a village, but wrote the village people a receipt. Okay, you can put that with your taxes. But thus we know, and early papyri tend to have dots, that the system was in place, but you wouldn't necessarily use it because the intelligence of the reader might be offended. I don't need these dots. Or in the Quran, there was a discussion at first, because the Quran had no dots either. Can the Quran be changed? Is that allowed? And after a while, after some controversy, the benefit of clarification won over. So the Quran today is pointed, it's dotted and vowelized and vocalized, which the earliest Quran manuscripts were not at all. So that, yeah.
Did the earliest manuscripts of the Quran not have some diacritics?
There are some almost without, but you're right, there are also some that have a little bit here and there. So the dotting, which in Quranic manuscripts were little strokes, was a system that was invented very early on. It's not just that it wasn't used. But here is where the memory comes in. The Quran was a text that a lot of people knew by heart. Same thing, as the Ruwat had memorized the poetry. Thus now the Hufaz, or the Qurra, meaning Quran readers, but actually reciters, they had it up here, was a new profession of people who remembered the Quran verbatim. You have those scholars to this day, and you can wake them up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they will recite it back to you with every fa and wa at the right place. And if they're good, they will have the 7 different readings in their head, if they're specialists. So human memory can be incredibly sharp if it has gone through the training. And now, this is not the kind of training we get when we're little. We don't learn stuff by heart. We have a cell phone. And at the same time, so people with the memory expertise still active used such written Qurans just as a Gedächtnisstütze, as a memory aid. They didn't need everything to written out. So for the Quran, that worked. It does not work, however, with other books, and this is how we will proceed. This is a different text. This is actually the letters of Paul. We have Arabic New Testament, and the Malkite Christian community in the Near East were very quick to translate the New Testament into Arabic. So different Christian groups were not so quick. The Copts had their sacred language. They didn't care that much. But the Melkites in the Levant, they very, very early on translated all their scriptures and other religious material into Arabic, which is interesting because we have early codices and early writing here. But those texts did not have ruwat. There was no such matching professional memory artist around to keep this text in shape. And therefore, the Arabic New Testament goes through more transformation than the Quran. With the Quran, we discovered that, now everybody knows that, but it was a sensation when in a Yemeni, the roof of a mosque, very early Quranic fragments were discovered from the 8th century. And if one looks at them now, the biggest difference you find is that an aleph is written miniature or down in the rasm as part of the main line. The differences of the Quran as text over history is really minimal. Whereas because the script was not the most essential thing to keep it in place, it was the technology of the human memory that worked together with it. And it worked together not as an either or, and that is very particular to Arabic studies and the treatment of memory, is it was always bimodal. It had a phase of our memory, and then it had a phase of writing. And then again an oral phase, and then again a phase of writing. And that lasted like this up to the 10th century, this bimodality. I'll say more about that later, that it developed its own technique. So with this text not being passed on in a tradition to keep it stable, to a greater extent. And now I have to tell you a little bit about that tradition. Here's a little bit of it. This is a dictionary. The tradition was that a text would be transmitted only through a person competent in it. So that changes the idea of what book is. A book was not something you took home and you read it and that was it. No, anything but. First of all, you probably couldn't read the book by yourself, since it had any terminology. It was not vocalized. You wouldn't even know what to pronounce it. Let's say a book on plants. Translation of Dioscorides Materia Medica, one of the pot boilers in Arabic. And so the standard technique of learning, of scholarship, was to go to a person who had either written the book, the author, or a student of the author. This person would then read the book aloud, or in a majlis, a reading session, one of the students would read the book aloud aloud. And the other people would listen. It's called sama. So a book was heard, yusma. Then after the book was heard, you could get you may have copied as a student, or one of the good students in class with a nice handwriting copied, and you copied your own copy, then you had the version of it. And then the teacher with whom you read the book would write, here is an ijaza, so-and-so read with me this book from here to here on such day. That meant that you were now competent to teach the book further. And so it went on. So without having received a book read aloud, the understanding of a book was not given, also not accepted by others. Oh, that person was not a student. He just copied it. And a person who just copied text was a Sohafi, amateur. Today it means journalist. And this bimodal technique of writing, propping up memory, and memory then completing the gaps in the writing is a very typical way for the Arabic textual tradition to live. And here we have a book by a scholar who made a list of all words that look alike in writing but mean something different when pronounced. So the particularity of the Arabic script that did not specify all the details left room for two things, for ambiguity, but also for play. Now, scholars of language, it's a very early discipline in Arabic, basically was born with 8th century. Those scholars wanted everything precise. So they would make long word lists of commonly misread words, lists of polysemic words, meaning you write one word, let's say any very, the simplest word, if you write ka-ba-ra, kaf-ba-ra, it can be kabr, kibr, kubr, kibar. So what the hell? And most Arabic words are like that. In the order to understand what the word or qadr, qidr, qudr, qadar, there's a whole collection of that. In order to understand such a word, you have to read the sentence in which it occurs. You need the context. So it's a contextual reading. And the mathematical possibilities of reading an Arabic word are just very wide. And this is why you need a lot of expertise, you need terminology, and you need grammatical knowledge, and you need knowledge of the discipline, and then you can use a book. So the book, the written piece, is very helpless by itself. Although Arabic book culture was one of the earliest book cultures in the world in the 9th century, we have we have like thousands of books. The Fihrist, which is a book catalog of Ibn Nadim from the 10th century, he lists all books available in manuscript. They're hard to count because some may have been chapters or duplicates and this and that and the other, but one counts about 5,000 authors. That's the 10th century. And he certainly did not include everything because he didn't think very highly of popular literature, although it's chapter 8 in his book, he mentions the titles. So on the one hand, a proliferating book culture, on the other hand, a very sophisticated technology to keep those books in shape, in stability. And here you have one such early book, which is another type of a dictionary. It's a dictionary of the read words of the prophetic tradition. So again, it's a scripture. These are hadith, qala, rasul, and then there are words one doesn't understand, and then Abu Ubaid proceeds to explain those to us. This is a funny hadith. This is the hadith of Zar'. That's why on the left side, you always it's very nicely formatted, by the way. It's a dialogue between women who talk about their husbands. So that's why قالت الأولى, قالت الثانية, قالت الثالثة, and so on and so forth. And it's in part of the hadith because it's a tale apparently that the Prophet told Aisha. If you want to know more about this, you can read a very long article by Franz Rosenthal about it. Here is a later book, which I just wanted to show you for the kind of side comments on the left side, because each book then carries its own history of usage with it. And that means the people who read the book would make their corrections, their additions, their remarks, and put that onto the margins of a book. So here you see a lot of them. And this is since we have rediscovered the manuscripts in their digital form, that we can now unearth the history of reading of manuscripts by deciphering those things on the margins. And then every Arabic book would have a colophon, means the person who copied it at the end would put his name, the date, sometimes the place, sometimes the person who paid him to do it. Sometimes he said, oh, I just copied that for myself. Then we know we have a private scholar or amateur learner. There are tons of those. So each of those manuscripts, if they have gone through use, have something like a social life that then helps us to do such things as reconstructing the library of a person. Because when you buy a book, you put an ownership mark. This is the milk, the ownership of such and such person. And by gathering all those notes, then, and one person's name recurring, you can reconstruct the library, as has been done with an Egyptian scholar who died 1830, Ahmed al-Rabat. So this whole library has been reconstructed. And with him, it's important because he was not a scholar. He was a composer. And his poetry wasn't colloquial. And what he collected were popular tales. He had a whole collection of siyar, and things like that, Sirat Baybar, Sirat el-Hama, and so on and so forth. So he was not somebody you would find mentioned in a biographical dictionary. He's not elite enough. But we have his library. And that helps us reconstruct his persona, and it's the kind of social history that you can do when you have manuscripts with readers' notes. So much so for, this is a nice picture of a table of content. Arabic script is sort of flexible because you can stretch words and put stuff in between. So the stretch thing, which always marks new title, is nothing but the word book. And if you stretch it enough, you can put page numbers on it. And so layouting was an early art in Arabic book. Now I will go back to this one and show you the other extreme of memory. So here we have a text that was not part of such a scholarly transmission. Now it once was, because at the time when it was written, this is Kalila wa Dimna, a mirror of Princeton, so a handbook for government, and Ibn Muqaffa, being in the 8th century, very early on, was more or less the person who invented elegant chancellery prose. So he was very famous. You have other books by him, like Al-Adab al-Kabir. But that is a book he translated from Middle Persian, and then it came back from India, so it's animal stories. And the animal stories have a way to behave just like the animals, not as they are supposed to. And this collection of tales, it's a frame tale of a philosopher and a king, and he tells him, the king always asks, what should I do when? And then the philosopher says, you should do. And then he gets the tales. And then the tales have tales, have tales, have tales. Sometimes there's a 5-fold frame. They're very well told. They're very funny. sometimes a bit racy. So in other words, that book had a very interesting fate. It ran under the radar of the transmission history. First of all, it disappears in the dark. For 500 years, we have no manuscript. The only thing that you have, scholars would say, it's all fluff, it's just, who needs stories? And they would quote the hikmah, the hikam, the little sayings. And they are all over Adab literature, Ibn Qutayba, Ibn Abd Rabbih, never mind. So we get wisdom sayings, one sentence long, but not the stories. Suddenly then the manuscripts came back. The Europeans were smarter because we have translations then into Spanish, Latin, Hebrew, Greek, Syriac, and Persian before the 13th century. Was one made in Germany by the founder of Tübingen University, Eberhard im Bad, but that was rather late. That was 1482. And the translation was made for the King of Castile. So the translation by the Europeans who got hold of these, they were for kings and for ministers, so it was a very valuable book. The Latin version is called Directorium Vitae Humanae, the Directory of Human Behavior, because Europeans would understand the allegorical nature of this. And it was about justice, injustice, friendship, betrayal, politics, not getting killed, killing the other person in war, how to make peace with enemies. It's all about that. So it works on the level of the state, but also works on the level of private ethics and smarts. So it was a very useful book, as you may think. In the Arab world, when the manuscript resurfaced, and this, of course, was made for a rich person because it's 14th century, it's beautifully illustrated, must have cost an arm and a leg. A lot of copies don't look that pretty. They're like chicken scratch and you can hardly read them, and they have no pictures, and which makes the next situation necessary, which is, this is the addition of the text. But this is not one text. Each column is one manuscript. And in this, you see, in each horizontal line is a part of the story. So in order to compare the manuscripts, you have to subdivide them into step by step of the story. Now, in the lower part, you see that some manuscripts have more text and others less, and of course the text is very different. But in the preceding unit, only a single manuscript has a piece of text. And if I remember correctly, it starts, I'm going, which means in a chapter between a lion and a jackal, it's about a king mistreating a minister and then trying to remedy the situation. And in most versions, it ends with reconciliation. This version, however, changes the ending. It says, I'm leaving. So there's the king's mistake cannot be corrected. And the minister who's pardoned and begged to stay says, no. And he goes back to the forest. It's animals, so he's... So here, the lack of a technology, or rather the non-application of a technology of memory to a written text, returned the freedom, the openness to the script that it had outside the government of the memorizing technology. And this is why versions of this particular text change so drastically. What you have on the bottom is a bit of a map. So each text oblong is represented in the overview of the entire chapter by a little box. You see that on the left, the boxes are rather dense. So most boxes are in most manuscripts. Each manuscript is a line. But the more you proceed on the story, the more the boxes tend to be sparse, and more manuscripts are different from each other, which means that this chapter is not in all chapters is it equally drastic, but in this chapter you can notice the interaction between the story and another forgotten type of a person, namely the copyist who copied the book. And those copyists were not always forgotten. Sometimes they did sign their name, but they would never say, oh, I changed anything. They would not acknowledge the interference. But we know they interfered because we can put things side by side. Now and then there is a copy of one version near verbatim, and 2 or 3 versions are pretty close. But that is actually the exception. In most cases, each copyist reacts. And in this chapter, it's about a king being led to condemn an innocent to death. And then a lot of discussions between the king's mother and the king, and then later the jackal he comes back to the king. And in different version, the king apologizes for sinning. The jackal is telling the king often, says, I really have to be harsh to you because you made 2 mistakes. So he's reading the right act to the king. So it's a rather interesting chapter on issues of justice. And that was one of the reasons, there are many reasons why these things happen, but this is one of the reasons that we have this interference of creativity versus preservation of a text as it was found. I can skip some others. These are just numerical ways to try to calculate difference, but that shows you that once you have a text in digitized form, you can put it through all sorts of analyses to measure distance and measure human creativity in a way to compare. This is, you have to always go back to the drawing board and go back to the pencil and then get back to the diagram. And this is one way to actually distinguish 2 groups of manuscripts that change, but they change in different directions. We call them continua. So here it is the manuscripts themselves who acquire some kind of motion. And so we have continua of texts that keep developing. And we certainly try to catch them, or we photograph them while they're doing that. And that's this is putting the text underneath color. Same color always means that this is the same wording. And you can see how the wording sort of flows across one. This is everything in yellow is one continuum. Pink is unique per manuscript. And then we move through a group on the left side that has a lot of green. This is early manuscripts that take sort of from left and right, and cross-copied manuscript, which means then some copyists became aware of the variety. And then they themselves combined versions. They made collages. So they were smart. They were aware of the mobile tradition and used it to maximize their version. So they, in a way, they were like early book editors. And here we move into the other continuum, that's blue. And I think I'll stop here because I've run over, right?
We have, yeah. I mean, we started late today, but because of the technological.
We had some technological hiccups. Yes.
But
there might be questions, right?
But yeah, officially we need to stop at 17:45. So for those who want to stay, you can just stay online or here. But those who want to leave, just feel free to do this. We will give you 1 minute to just decide.
Question. You mentioned the pre-Islamic poems. Just like, I have a quick question if you could answer also briefly. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the Naguib Mahfouz argument that they're not actually pre-Islamic.
Yeah, thank you. And Ignatius Margolius had the same thesis.
Huh?
Ignatius Margolius, a Hungarian Orientalist, they independently came up with that.
Around the same time?
Yeah.
So what is the current scholarship?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I was saying that radical rejection of what is, in a way, canonical texts. But part of it, the reasoning wasn't quite that off, because he said the Quran is the earliest secure document we have. And that's true. The Quran was written down within a few decades. And as we now know with today's scholarly textual history, the transmission was quite good. But at the time, one had no handle to deal with the variance that happens in an oral tradition. And people got confused, Ibn al-Qais' ode, sometimes verses here, the verses there, verses missing, half verses different. And they thought, okay, the text is not stable and not absolutely stable, therefore it must be forged. But nowadays, after the big breakthrough was the studies on the Iliad and Odyssey and Yugoslav singers of tales by Perry and Lord. And they studied how an oral tradition develops. And that has given an understanding that an oral tradition is authentic if it changes a little bit. And then a person by the name of Michael Zwettler has written a book, The Old Tradition of Classical Arabic Poetry, and that pretty much closed the debate.
It is actually pretty strong.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, and also, especially the variety and the unexplainability and the type of crazy vocabulary that you find in early poems is proof that it was authentic. If anybody had forged it, it would be way more consistent. It is highly inconsistent.
Isn't that one of Taha Hussein's arguments, that they're actually very consistent in terms of the dialect, that they're all written?
No, they're not consistent.
They're all came down to us through the Qurayshi dialect, right?
No. There were, it's a long story, but there are different Arab tribes, but before Islam, there was a kind of conventional, poetic, mixed language that they all used. Yeah.
Islamic tradition, is that true?
It's, we have no better hypotheses at the moment than that. And the later classical Arabic has features of Qurayshi, but it also has feature of Tamimi. And because the early grammarians would write down those features. And so it was, you can't say constructed, but it was a poetic creation. And then later on in Islam, in the 8th century, the grammarians would systematize it and write the grammars down, but it existed earlier. And if you look at grammar, they call it pre-classical and classical Arabic.
Does anyone have a question? Online and offline? I mean, online we don't have any raised hands. No? Then,
I don't see any.
Yeah, then thank you for people on WebEx, and again, like we, the team, the student team, we are here to provide assistance to the professors and in creating the hybrid.
Thank you very much.
The hybrid, like the format.
Professor, I have a question, please.
There's a question. Yeah,
in regards.
Myrna, you have a question, yeah?
Yeah, hello, Professor. In regards to the manuscript and the boxes and the colors, this is my first experience with such, I don't know what it's called, but maybe it's a method, but how can I teach myself on learning this? Yes, exactly, this one. This is my first time coming across this, so is there a resource that I can learn about this independently, because this is my first time seeing it?
Well, we have tons of publications. You can go to our website, Khalila Wadibna in Arabic Studies. And you can also come, anybody who is interested, by the way, to our weekly research colloquium every Thursday from 12 to 2. It's open, anybody can attend if you want to see us at work. But online, go to Arabic Studies, and then you will see this one here. This is done by Marwa Ahmed, a member of the team. It's a preview edition that shows you the whole, also one text at a time if you want, but then also text side by side, including in English translation. So you can start looking at that website. And if you want to know more, you are cordially encouraged to attend our research colloquium. And if you forgot anything I say, just write to me again.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I mean, this website is an innovation, and it's a very nice project of the Khalila and Dimna project that was run for so many years. And yeah, we will share with you also on the Blackboard the links for the Dr. Islandaya's project.
The philological encounters. Yeah, please make
and
make
also the link where you can access this page or website, which helps people who are studying Arabistik or philology, I think, to validate the text of Khalila and Dimna. And it's an example, a prototype for hopefully more projects in this regard that are working. I mean,
yes,
you can also, I mean, that's how I just see it, but you can just say a few words about this amazing project, because I'm so, I mean, even you can use your mobile to navigate in this application. It's a mobile application, right?
It's here. That's my mobile, and that's how it looks on the mobile. So for proofreading, I love that. It's great. Yeah, we're trying to make sense of this Khalila Wadimna, and we have a nice team. We got some grant money, so other than having a huge team of not only postdocs, but doctoral students and student assistants who type up the manuscripts and write commentaries. But then we have also colleagues who read with us the Syriac, the Hebrew, the Castilian, the Greek, and the Persian versions, and we compare them. Sometimes it's crazy what happens. So the Persian version is full of Arabic poetry, for instance, and Quran. He made it even more Islamic than well, it wasn't very Islamic before, but the Persian Arabic is very Islamic. And in the Hebrew version, it's interesting because it replicates the Arabic syntax. So it sounds more Arabic than actually Hebrew grammar-wise. And we don't know exactly where it was, but our team member thinks it was probably done in Andalus, not in Italy. So it's in the Castilian version is also quite shocking how close, how verbatim the translation is from the Arabic. And we have now found which of the Arabic manuscripts is the closest to it. So it's we've published an interim report on it, and we have 2 journal issues that are out now, if you want to know anything about it. But it radiates, Khalila radiates in many different directions. This is, today I was talking about memory and text stability, but it is in a cross-cultural mobile text. And it goes also across religion. It starts in Hinduism, it ends up in Christianity. It's not a problem. But even the Arabic text has a famous passage on the doubt of religions of Bourzoi's autobiography, where he looks at all the religions. He doesn't believe anyone. He makes his own religion. It's a very, very critical passage of religion. People don't know, was it by him or Ibn Qafa? That's the debate. It's difficult to say. On the other hand, it's an ethical book that a lot by many of its authors is called philosophy. It's a kind of practical philosophy. And sure, it's an entertaining philosophy. It's more like the kind of Hayy ibn Yaqzan. But it's a house book, and it was incredibly popular. And that's what you can say, that people, so mainly older adepts or, people who were not sort of the scholarly specialists in the 17th and 18th century loved reading this book and had a copy at home or would get it from a lending library. So it was very widely distributed and received. So what else? And then it's a fictional text, and fiction in Arabic literature is way under researched. There needs to be more done with it. You wanted to say something?
Sorry if I misheard, but did you mention Greek among the multilingual versions of it? So when do you think this might have been produced?
There are two versions. One version was done in Byzantium and was actually done for the Basileus by a Greek by the name of Simeon Seth. And then, so not in Greece, Byzantium, Constantine, Istanbul. And then probably a century later, a Sicilian general, Eugenius of Palermo, had something to do with a new version, because the older version was short, it had only 10 chapters, but his version, and not only his, there were other people involved, but his name is somehow connected with it, made a new version for, Eugenius of Palermo was a translator and scholar, he made it for a Sicilian general. And that is called Eugenian's recension, 12th century, that is more complete. And the two differ quite a bit from each other. Then there is a third version. They were in southern Italy. Some fragments of Kalila Wadimna were also discovered. And that part of Italy, you know, the heel of the boot, actually the heel, it was a very cosmopolitan part of Italy. There are also Greek villages where people spoke Greek. So more research needs to be done on that.